What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Homestead Studios, and today's episode I want to focus on kitchen lighting. Now, interestingly enough, over the past couple weeks we've had a few clients order kitchen design packages who both specified the want or the need for a really wide and diverse array of kitchen lighting. So, what a perfect time to dive into this subject a little bit deeper, talk about the ins and outs of kitchen lighting, or the ons and offs if you will, and really discuss why it's essential in certain areas and maybe not so essential in others. When I go about designing kitchens, I like to break the lighting component up into two different sections. That's general or down lighting and then task lighting. So let's start with general or down lighting. And what this generally refers to is the general lights of your room. So ceiling lights, pot lights, disc lights, whatever you want to call them, just your general down lighting in the space. Now it's easy to think just shove the lights up in the ceiling and you're good to go. I mean, what more do you need than just some general lighting in the room? But it's a little bit more complicated than that, because where you put those lights will actually affect how you use your space. So let's start out by talking about down lights or pot lights up in the ceiling. Where do we place them? How far apart should they be? That sort of thing. So I like to place my down lights right at the edge of my countertop. So this puts them roughly 24.5 to 25.5 inches off the wall. And there's a very specific reason for this. Any further back, and when those lights are on, your body is going to cast a shadow onto your prep area, onto your countertop where you're working. And that's going to be relatively annoying. Any closer to the wall, and they're not really lighting up the rest of the space. They're only lighting up directly above your countertop. So the next big thing is, well, how far apart should these downlights be? And that's really dependent on a couple things. How big is the room? How tall are your ceilings? What size of pot light are you using? So I'm going to give you a few examples based on the work we do. Now, we're typically working in 8 or 9 foot ceiling houses. This house, for example, is a 9 foot ceiling, and I have 4-inch pot lights up in the ceiling. So a rough rule of thumb to start with is divide your ceiling height in half, and that gives you kind of your starting point for how far apart your pot light should be. So take this space, for example, where I have 9 foot ceilings and 4-inch pot lights up there. Now typically this would dictate a spacing of about 4.5 feet, but in the case of this space it made more sense to go down to about 4 feet apart, because A, it worked better for the spacing with the countertop because we were able to hit a little edge on the side of the stove over there, as well as add some light into the hallway heading downstairs. So it really depends on the room you're working in, but general rule of thumb, divide that ceiling height in half and start there. So under that general or down lighting category and these new open concept houses, you can also include stuff like dining room lights and living room lights, all to be sort of under one heading. So I'm not going to dive too much into that because that's kind of home interior design as a whole, but here's a couple things to think about. First of all, if you're working in a giant space, think about the lumens as well as the warmth or the Kelvin of those lights. For example, a really bright or 5,000 Kelvin light in the kitchen and a 3,000 Kelvin light in the living room, if they're all in at once, you will see very different temperature changes throughout that space. And finding a middle ground might be the better option. Now, one idea I like to use, or I've used in all of my houses in the past, is to use all of my down lights or my pot lights at the same temperature, roughly around 4,000 or 4,500 Kelvin. This allows all the spaces to flow really continuously together without seeing those hard shifts in lighting changes. And then to add some warmth or ambiance to the space, I use things like floor lighting, table lamps, or sconces, which can bring down that Kelvin, warm up, and create a little bit more of an intimate setting. Again, I'm not going to dive too far into this because that's kind of getting into the interior design side of things, and I want to stick with kitchen lighting. Well, that brings us to segment 2 of this discussion on kitchen lighting, and that's task lighting. So lighting specifically placed according to tasks throughout your space. Now, the two most obvious examples to think about are your fridge and your range or your cooktop, and not necessarily specifically your cooktop and your range, but the ventilation above it. Both of them have lighting specifically dedicated to the tasks you're going to be doing. For example, you don't want to open your fridge doors and have just a dark, cavernous space where it's really hard to find things. You want it to be brightly lit and easy to be able to sort through or look through and see exactly what's in there. No different on your cooktop. You want to be able to have that extra lighting so you can see exactly what you're doing as you're working in that space. Now, it's no different as you move through the rest of your kitchen, be it your sink area, your countertops, an island, a peninsula, you name it. So let's start with the most common, and that's under cabinet lighting. So even though you have downlights in your space that are directly at the edge of your countertops, wall cabinets often create a shaded or dark area underneath them. By adding under cabinet lighting, we can completely make this disappear. This is really important for areas that are commonly used for food prep, cooking, etc., because you're not working in a dark space. Now, the most common way to add under cabinet lighting is right from the very beginning of your kitchen design, and it's typically in the form of kind of LED strips. Now, that all requires some electrical to be done behind the wall, and if you're looking to retrofit an old kitchen, there are options for that too. For example, in a client's home last year, we added sort of puck-style lights that just need to be clicked to be turned on. Really simple. They can be changed colors. I believe they also went red, green, and blue. And on top of that, they came with a remote that allowed you to make them as bright or as dim as you want. So even if your kitchen is completely done, there are options to add under cabinet lighting after the fact. The next most common place we add in task lighting is above peninsulas and islands. And let's be honest, these places are the workhorses of our house. Not only are they important for cooking and prepping food, they are often the site of social gatherings, kids doing homework, family game night. They are sort of a do-everything space in our houses. And you really want a light that is going to be suitable for all of those activities. Now, the cool thing about island lighting or peninsula lighting is this is also a great place where form can meet function. You can have a little bit of creative style, you can represent your personality and select pieces that are kind of unique to you, as long as they still serve their primary function of lighting up that space. There's a couple reasons we typically use pendants over these spaces. First of all, down lights can often create sort of a spotlight effect, and they bounce the light backwards and up into your eyes when you're working at them. Whereas pendants, especially on glossy surfaces, tend to distribute nice and evenly, creating an evenly lit space. So the big questions really become, how big and how far apart should these pendants be over top of, let's say, a kitchen island? Now, this is largely dependent on your particular space, but here's a couple things that I like to think through before I go choosing those specific fixtures. What is the star of the kitchen? What is the star of the space? Where do you want the eye to be drawn? So do you have some really amazing cabinets or some fancy appliances? Do you have kind of an ornate eye-popping backsplash? Well, if that's the case, if you have any of those, you really don't want your pendants to be a focal point. So you want to pick something a little bit more subtle, a little bit more muted, that blends in and enhances your particular star, be it your backsplash, your cabinetry, etc. Now, on the other hand, if you have a little bit more of a muted or neutral toned kitchen without any of those features, the island pendants or the peninsula pendants are a great place to add a little bit of character, add a little bit of oomph and personality, and give a little bit of that eye-catching design to your space. The next thing I like to think about when choosing a pendant fixture or any sort of hanging fixture is to think about sightlines and the visual impact they're going to have on the space. Kitchens are already a really visually busy space. We've got hardware, we've got cabinets, we've got shiny appliances, we've got a whole lot of things going on. You don't want to create these big blocks, these big blobs over top of an island, really distracting and cutting up visual sightlines. So I often like to choose fixtures that are a little bit more open in nature or glass in nature that don't disrupt sightlines and keep the space feeling open and airy. So finally, spacing. The biggest thing to think about with any sort of pendant lighting is to make sure that the light is distributed evenly across the space. So that could mean placing them closer together if you've got smaller fixtures, or spreading them out a little bit further if you're working with big fixtures. The key thing when it comes to any sort of pendant spacing is just to make sure the light is distributed evenly across the work surface. You don't want little cups of lighting across an island, you want a nice, evenly lit work area. So the last common area you typically see task lighting within a kitchen is above the kitchen sink. Now, this can range from everything from track style lighting all the way to pendants. Now, I like to use pendants in my designs for a couple reasons. First, if you do have an island or peninsula in your space, you can start tying in that design together. Second, if you don't have an island or peninsula in your space, that is a great place to add that character and personality that you would have done with island or peninsula fixtures. Now, the final group, or what I like to think of as a group of task lighting within a kitchen, is the in-cabinet lighting. So for example, if we included any glass door cabinets within a kitchen, these are typically meant to highlight the items inside. So with that, we like to add a pot light at the top of those cabinets, a specific spot down style pot light that can light up those specific items. The other option for in-cabinet lighting is drawer lighting. And these are specifically sensor based that when you open the drawer, it lights up your area. Now, personally, I don't really think spending money on this area makes a lot of sense, especially with something like IKEA's kitchen system, where the drawers are full extension. If you have adequate lighting in the rest of your space, you shouldn't need any in-drawer lighting. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I don't open my drawers in the dark, so I don't really need in-drawer lighting. But that is something you can add, and IKEA does make products to include inside or within your kitchen design. The final thing I want to briefly touch upon is the design of these fixtures themselves. Now, I typically like to bring the colors and the style back in with the rest of the kitchen space. So for example, if I'm using black hardware on all of the cabinets, I like to have those black elements within my lighting as well. This just helps tie in the design all together. That being said, don't be afraid to mix metals in a space. You don't have to have all black everything. Black faucet, black hardware, black lights, black, 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 black. You can mix and match different metals. The most common thing to think about is like with like. So, cabinets, if you've got black hardware on one, well, you should probably have black hardware on all of them. But that doesn't mean you can't have, say, a gold faucet. Now, if you have a black light in one area, you probably should have black lights everywhere. Don't start having black in one area and chrome in another and brushed nickel in another. It starts to look very disjointed. So if this video got you excited to learn about even more kitchen design, I've got a couple videos queued up for you guys right there. If all of this just was way too overwhelming and you have no interest in designing your own space but do want to work with some professionals, head over to thehomestead.com and click on that little Homestead Studio section. We would love to work with you guys on your next space. On that note, thanks a ton for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button so you'll see more content just like this, and we'll see you guys in the next one.